Yo, 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 what is going on, RoK Familia? It is your boy BN, aka Mr. Kingdom Builder, and today we are back again giving you guys some more of this good quality education and information. Today, we are going to be touching on another important role as a member of an alliance, and also at times something that can kind of extend beyond that. So we're going to touch a little bit about that part, but mainly focus on how this role, specifically as kind of an intelligence gatherer slash officer, can play a really big role for your, well, for lack of better words, your alliance, and also your kingdom too as well. So we're going to touch a little bit on that. Before we get started, as always, make sure you guys sub, like, ring the notification bell, and of course, if you want to join and be a part of our conversation, hit up our Discord, which you can find in the pinned comment and description down below. Okay, so first things first, right? What is an intelligence officer? What do you do when you're gathering intelligence, when you're going out there and gathering data? What is the idea behind it? So for the most part, it is pretty self-explanatory. You're usually doing things, for example, something like a tech audit in your alliance, right, would be something that could suffice as this. And if we, excuse me, had to use the keyboard there, but if we go into your alliance, right, and you take a look at your settings, you go rankings, this is something we touched on when you are an officer and as a lead, you can go in here and look at something like, okay, well, hey, here's the overall tech donations that everyone is giving. You can look at things like individual power, right? You can kind of take things like audits and look at, you know, what the growth rate would be for these. You can also look at things like builder, which obviously plays a little bit bigger of a role when it comes to kind of the beginning and kind of middle stages of the kingdom. Not so much kind of once you already have zone 3 access, you've already captured temple, and then you pretty much are kind of just working on finishing out and just kind of doing additional flagging at that point. But this is some of the areas that as an intelligence rep or officer you would do for your alliance, right? You would go out and kind of use spreadsheets, you'd calculate current data, you look at it over a set period of time, you might pull that data every couple days, maybe once a week, right? That's kind of what it really entails. Now, when it comes to how you can use the data right now, you can obviously pull data for your alliance. And this is number 2. You can pull data for your alliance. You can pull data for your kingdom. You can also pull data in KVK matchups. Now, usually, and more specifically, you want to try and look at pulling relevant data that you can use in an informative way for not only hopefully your alliance, your kingdom, and then when those KVK matchups come up, right? And I'm going to give you an example of each too as well. So let's first start with your alliance. Now, in your alliance, right, as we said, probably the most relevant thing you're going to do usually is going to be tech donations, right? So let's just go back there for a moment. And if we look at tech donations, something that you want to do, and you can notice as a little tip, is that every single donation that you do, right, you can probably see, well, there's no odd numbers, right? It looks like it's increments of 100. Well, that's because it is, right? Every donation you do is 100. So when you're doing these, especially early on in the beginning stages of your kingdom, you want to make sure, right? We're talking zone 1, right? You just landed. You want to be probably auditing every 2 to 3 days, where you have someone that goes through and they'll basically take 30 minutes or however long, and they'll just kind of go down the list, look at each person, find the name, write the number, next name, write the number, next name, write the number, kind of a rinse, wash, and repeat. And then you want to do that, and then you want to look at what the plus growth is. So, you know, maybe you have, right, because again, if you're doing, you know, you could probably do, right, it's what is it, 20, it's about 48 donations, I think, per 24-hour period, because you get a donation every 30 minutes. So, right, it's double that up, right? So 20 over a 24-hour period, you times it by 2, right? You get 48 for every 30 minutes. So you could do 48 donations. You get 100 per donation. So you're looking at about 4,800 over a daily period, right? So every 4,800 donations is what you should be getting just per day, right? Now, you would essentially use that and kind of gauge how, like, what the increases are, right? Are you getting that actual amount across a day, because if you're getting 4,800, right, then you're looking at 9,600 over a 2-day period, right? So you basically want to do, right, you want to do that plus minus there in the alliance to see what does that growth look like over a couple days, essentially. And it'll tell you, are these players donating on a consistent basis to also show a level of activity, right? This is one area. You can also go over here to individual power, and this is a little more straightforward, right? You basically would just come in here. You don't really need to gauge anything out, but you would still do the plus or minus in some cases, but mostly plus on what the increases are. So for here, you kind of just want to go off of, is there a steady power increase, right? And then what's interesting is when you're doing individual power audits, right, you can actually kind of figure out trends when you're pulling the data, right? You can pay attention to, who are more the free-to-play players or players that that are free-to-play, who are some of the spenders, and you can try to get somewhat of a baseline, like a consistent established baseline on kind of what is that average free-to-play growth maybe at the top end, and kind of use that to set your high markers. But just knowing that players are constantly increasing power, they're constantly donating, these are great ways to indicate that, hey, these are active people, right? And if they're not that active, then sometimes you can use that as an identifier to reach out if needed, if it's something that consistently happens over a couple days or up to a week. And you can say, hey, just wanted to follow up. It seems like you maybe haven't been being that active, or you haven't been donating as consistently, where it seems like you're missing a few per day. Is everything okay, right? Are you busy? Are you away? Are you just not able to be on or off? And just sometimes reaching out as a friendly reminder, not to say like, hey, we're going to remove you, but just to kind of find out what's going on. Sometimes just a friendly reach out can be really good, especially if you are someone who's doing the data collecting. Then we get over to point number, I think this is 4, when it comes to home kingdom, right? So now you're thinking about, what am I doing and my home kingdom? And so here, I have to get out, not to there. So we'll go over here to global. And when we get here, now you're going to look at things like your alliance power, right? You can kind of gauge this if you want to across every couple days. Maybe you just pull the data once a week. Sometimes it's nice to see kind of what all your active alliance growth is. Maybe you just pull this up to like the top 20 alliances, maybe the top 30, however many, but you can use this in, I think, a really good way. The next thing I think is alliance flags. You can look at what the alliance flag growth rate is, and sometimes you can even use this information when it comes to how are you able to work with the other alliances if you do work with them, and kind of work on, hey, well, what are some good practices? What are some tips as far as for kind of getting the highest amount of flag rates that we can, or new flag placements that we're able to. And then I'd say the last thing here would be individual power, right? If there's certain people you want to track on here, if you want to track your top 300, right, that's something you can do as well to kind of see what your kingdom power looks like. Again, these are just some things you can do on a kingdom level. On a continent level, you basically would kind of do what you're doing on a kingdom level. It just depends on how much, but you would just multiply that, right, times or adding the other 7 kingdoms there, right, to have the 8 kingdom total. Then you can start doing things like comparison data, right, between them. Right, so which are really cool things. KVK matchups, pretty much the same thing as doing continents, except you just kind of have to wait until the KVK matchups come up, with the exception of KVK 1, because you just already know kind of where it's going to line up. Now, I think that was what? That was, 3, 4, where was I? 5, 6, 7? Okay, so now we're on 8. So the 8th thing here is going to be, I think it's really important to package information well, especially when you're doing kind of data entry like this, where you probably are going to use a spreadsheet, whether something like it's Google Sheets, which I'm fine with if you're using another spreadsheet. Gosh, I can't even think of another one right now. But if you are, right, I think just using a spreadsheet in general can be really good when it comes to being able to organize and kind of format your data. Now, when you're presenting the information, right, this kind of gets into the next one here, which I think now we're on 8. So communicating that information, right, that you are presenting. And that can be, presenting that to the council, and then you kind of get to this stage where you're communicating that information, right? So you want to be sure that you're keeping first and foremost your department up to date, or if, again, it is just the alliance, that you're updating your officer team and your leader, right? And then that lead would update council, or maybe you're doing it already on their behalf. But again, if we're just talking about within your alliance, then you operate with your officer team and your lead, right? So again, communicating with them is vitally important. And then the last thing I'm going to give you here, which I think is just kind of my special pro tip, which comes down to how you can use this information in a very motivational way and engaging way for your kingdom as a whole. So think of giving them a weekly newspaper, right? So kind of almost like a weekly status, like a newsletter. Because the thing to keep in mind is that kingdom mails are essentially, your newspaper. They are your online news consumption source. Mainly because the only way to absolutely message every single player in the kingdom is through Kingsmail. So the assumption, and then added on from that, even though many kingdoms try to convert as many players as they can from the kingdom over to Discord, you are never ever going to have, at least from my experience and from what I would just assume, and I would imagine almost everyone, if not everyone, has experienced this themselves when you try to do it, I'm gonna go with never, ever going to get 100% of all the active players in your kingdom that come over onto Discord. It's just not going to happen. So you have to rely on Kingsmail first and foremost before kind of doing anything else or in addition to, but as the number one priority when it comes to how you provide information to your player base. And so sometimes thinking of what kind of cool content they would love to hear and not just giving them kind of the textbook mails that most kingdoms do, try to think a little bit outside of the box and how to use some of this data in that way. Because trust me, you can really engage and immerse your kingdom's community in a lot more ways than you even think you can. With that being said, that is it for me. I would love to know what your guys' thoughts are. Are you someone who does intelligence? And if you are, I'd love to know, again, are these some of the things that you like to pull data from in your kingdom? Are you someone who maybe didn't know how engaged and how immersed someone who does intelligence can really impact their alliance, their kingdom, and more? Right? I'd love to know anything and everything you guys are thinking in those comments down below. That's it for me. Until next time, I'll catch you later.